Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 29. Today's interview is with Trevor Gilday, who is a senior VFX artist at Archetype Entertainment in Austin, Texas. Trevor has worked on projects like the Mass Effect series, Anthem, and the critically acclaimed franchise Dragon Age. Trevor has a rich background in visual effects, working both in studio and remotely as a freelancer. With that said, let's dive in.
Welcome to the Real-Time Visual Effects Podcast, the place to hear from some of the video game industry's most seasoned artists and up your game. Listen in on how you can learn and grow as a VFX artist, discover your own wizard, and network with hundreds of other talented magicians in the real-time visual effects community. Here is your host, Travis McCallum.
Hey, good morning, Trevor. How you doing today, man?
Good morning. I am well. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's raining here in Texas. It's been raining for the last couple days. I don't know where this January weather has taken us into such cold weather for Texas. You're up in Canada, right? What part?
Edmonton, Alberta. Yeah, we've got a lot of snow here. I heard that you guys got some interesting snow type weather recently.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a flakes and a flurries, and all the kids were out there, playing, and didn't really amount to like more than maybe an inch. But hey, we never get to see it. So, Trevor, I want to talk to you about some of these awesome projects that you worked on at companies like Anthem and Dragon Age and the Mass Effect series. But I really want to start with your origin story and ask, how did you get started in visual effects?
Sure. I've always been artistic my whole life. I started animating at a very young age. I started making, flip books in the margins of books and notepads and stuff like that. And then going into junior high, I made friends with somebody who liked to make these home movies with G.I. Joes, toys and stuff like that. And we're still very close friends, going on 25 years. And we became fascinated by stop motion, Wallace and Gromit, and other animated movies of the time. So we started experimenting with this VHS camera that he had, making stop motion using toys, claymation, and like every weekend, I practically lived in his parents' basement, sometimes sleeping over there, multiple nights in a row. And we would take turns making G.I. Joes fight each other in these dumb, pointless little movies like that. And we just fell in love with that medium. And we started to get better and better at it. And we even started exploring more sophisticated techniques like building wire armatures for our clay figures, sewing fabric costumes, using beads for eyes. We gleaned all this stuff from Wallace and Gromit, right? And we sort of established this healthy, friendly competition, who could animate better, who could like one up the other guy. And we're just using this horrendously bad VHS camera that sort of like laid the groundworks for my animation chops.
With all that amazing stop motion work, I'm just curious, were there any kind of like stories that you wrote or scenarios that like really came to mind?
You know what? Everything we did was like just completely pointless. There was no story at all. It was really off the cuff. You would just like, I'd grab a toy and be like, I'm going to make this guy fight this guy. And then I would maybe make like a Lego set to go with them. And they'd be like smashing the Lego walls with punches and stuff like that. And it was just so low tech. And this VHS camera, man, it was like you had a remote and we pushed the button. It would take a second for the thing to spool up. And you could tell it was recording when the red light came on. But there was always this like 2-second buffer before it would start recording. So you had to sit there and like turn it on and then wait a few seconds and then turn it off. If you turned it off at just the right time, you would get a very quick frame. But if you didn't, you would have a really long frame and their animation would suffer, right? So we got really good at that timing. And it was just like this, you could tell if you watch the VHS tapes, like over time, we got better and better at getting the timing perfect. And it got really smooth at the end. It was ridiculous, but it was so fun.
That's so cool. What happened next?
So yeah, we started learning the fundamentals of timing, and you sort of figure out just through experimentation what makes a good animation, what doesn't make a good animation, right? And just problem solving, right? You have this toy and you have some sticky tack and that's all you have to work with. How can you do tricks within the frame to make this character do different things, right? That evolved over the course of 6 years or so, just messing around. After high school, both of us enrolled in this multimedia course that was offered here in Edmonton at Alberta College, where they taught mostly graphic design and web animation, some 3D things. But this introduced me to things like Photoshop, Flash, Maya, and a program that will always be close to my heart, which is Lightwave. I don't know. Have you ever used Lightwave?
No, what's Lightwave?
Lightwave it's kind of like 3ds Max. It's a very odd 3D program. Honestly, I haven't touched it in years. I only remember certain
Does it
things
still
about
exist?
It does still exist. Yeah. I should check that out again for a trip down memory lane. Yeah, that's what I learned how to use. And then after my course had finished, I was put into like a work placement. The work placement they put me in was these 2 filmmakers here in Edmonton had shot this really low budget sci-fi movie called Armored Fury. And they had all of the footage was done, but they needed like CGI shots in between of like tanks shooting each other and spaceships flying in space. And my work placement was to do a couple of shots, a spaceship flying through space. So I did that. And after my placement, those guys were really impressed with what I did. So they hired me for a year or so to produce all the other shots needed for the film, all in Lightwave.
That's so cool. I'm wondering, when we talk about that spaceship scene, for example, and you're talking about Lightwave, and maybe you can touch base on this. Had it crossed your mind on doing like a stop motion version of the spaceship in like real time, kind of how they did like the Star Wars battles? Or did you always know you were going to do it in like a computer animated world? At
the time, I was a big fan of like Reboot, Beast Wars, and like Pixar movies. So I was really gung-ho to like dive right into 3D animation. It never did cross my mind to try and actually do a practical ship model. I'm not a model builder myself, like a handmade models. Maybe if I had been more into that, that would have been an avenue I could have explored. Yeah, I was super gung-ho for 3D back then. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to do it in 3D.
And you did. I wonder if that movie's still available, right? If people wanted to check out your scene.
You know, I haven't Googled it in a while. I don't think it's online. I have a DVD burn of it. It's really bad. I don't like, it's not, those guys did the best they could. I shouldn't trash talk them. Those guys did an amazing job with what they had. But the CG shots that I did are really bad. Like it was only me, and it was like they didn't have anyone else working on them. So obviously the production quality of what I produced is really low. But for the time, I was like, it was the best I could do.
All right, what happened next?
At the time, I was doing it all in Lightwave, and I did a couple of shots that had some explosions and some dust effects and like an EMP explosion. And I was using Lightwave's, they had this effects system that they called hypervoxels, which is just a fancy way of saying like, volumes. You could get some semi-realistic stuff in it. Looking back at it, I'm like, doesn't look so good.
At the time, that technology was probably pretty cutting edge.
I think it was. I don't even know if other software packages at the time even had fluid simulations like that. Maybe they did. I don't know. After that, I finished all the shots and I gave it back to them, and then they sort of cut it together. I don't know what happened to it after that. I'm not sure what they did with it. After that, I kind of worked some odd jobs, and it was around this time that I was made aware that BioWare was in Edmonton. Before that, I had no idea. And I knew a few guys through acquaintances who worked there. And I thought, yeah, I want to be a level artist like them. I'm going to work on my 3D demo reel and try to get a job there. So then this job fell into my lap, which I can't even remember how it happened, but it was ORTS, ORTS, which was a study this professor at the University of Alberta was doing into AI and machine learning using a StarCraft-like structure. I think he wanted to pit AIs against each other in his own StarCraft game and study the AI. I think that's what it was. So he needed a bunch of units for this computer software. It just so happened that he was using the Quake engine. I think it was the Quake engine. And I found this Lightwave plugin, which allowed me to export animated meshes as MD3 file format. And through my own experimentation, I already knew how to model and skin and animate characters in Lightwave. So it all dovetailed nicely. So I made a bunch of assets for him. I added that to my demo reel. And it was a lot of like ripoffs of all the StarCraft units, like the Zerg guys and all of the buildings and everything. I had to build all of the units and buildings that were in the game.
So Lightwave itself is all pre-baked. So you were making the animations, and then you would export them into the Quake engine, which then was real time, and you would kind of incorporate that. Right? That was kind of the story.
Yeah. Lightwave, I learned how to like skin everything using the bones in Lightwave. And I even learned some like IK systems for animating. I think I was looking up tutorials online. I don't remember. It was so long ago. So around this time was about 2006. And I think I had heard BioWare was really looking for people to ramp up on a project, which was Mass Effect at the time. And I wasn't super happy with my demo reel, but I figured I would try. So I sent it in, the intent of getting like a level artist position. And on my reel was a couple of shots from that sci-fi film, which which I had worked on, which were a lot of with the effects in them, the hypervoxel effects, like the EMP explosion, stuff like that. And the lead VFX guy at BioWare at the time, I guess, saw potential in that work. I got called in for an interview, and then a second one after that. And then I was called in to meet the team. And it wasn't until I was like halfway through the third interview that they told me I was going to be hired as a VFX guy, which was something I had never even considered. I meet the team, and they started showing me, what they're working on, and it was unreal. It was Unreal 3, like a very early version of Unreal 3. And the stuff they showed me, to my unskilled younger self, just completely floored me. And I was like, I'm going to be doing this? Are you guys sure? Like, are you kidding me?
Oh my gosh, it's magic. These are wizards.
Yeah, exactly. And, I just didn't have a lot of confidence in myself at the time. They trained me, and I started to get a grasp of how real-time effects worked, and I just fell in love with it completely. And early on, I started to realize that I had a real knack for the workflow. And I think a big part of that is not only tied to the animation skills that I developed in my younger years. I've always had a really good memory for details. Like I remember details that, other people would go right over their heads, right? I remember all internalized. I think it's from early in my life. I just played a lot of video games and watched a lot of TV. And I think I developed a memory for just little details in everything, right?
Yeah. So on that note, why BioWare? What was it that attracted you to apply in the first place? Is it because you did have a love for video games and you wanted to get involved in the industry, or?
Yeah, it's a combination of things, right? Like, yeah, I've always been a gamer. I wasn't into PC gaming at the time. I was more of a console guy, just a fan of gaming and 3D shows and movies and animation. So all these things sort of combined. And the fact that it was in Edmonton, like I at that time, I wasn't ready to move out of Edmonton, and they were the only video game company in town. So I was like, I got to go for it. It's the only one here, right?
That's awesome, Trevor. I'm really happy that you were able to find a place so early in your life too, to be able to take all those lessons and portfolio pieces and build upon that unexpectedly. Find yourself in a role that was a perfect fit. The best part about it all is you had this amazing team that was willing to foster and cultivate your talent and your potential into something really great.
Yeah, definitely.
Fast forward, 10, 20 years where you are today in 2021, of all the projects that you've been able to work at, whether at BioWare, through your freelance work, which one's been your most favorite project to work on and why?
I would say definitely Anthem. There was something special about what we created as a team. And I'm very proud of what not only the VFX team accomplished, but all the art and design teams. Anthem will always have a special place in my heart because I put in well over 500 hours into the game after ship.
And just so we know, what is Anthem? What's kind of like the story behind it? What is it? What kind of game is it?
Anthem is a 4-person team action adventure science fiction game. It's like an online service game, a looter shooter essentially. As I was saying, yeah, I think I put in over 500 hours, and I don't think any game I've played in my life I've racked up that much playtime. Maybe something like Perfect Dark or Smash Brothers on N64, but of course back then there weren't in-game timers to track you how much time you played it. I was the lead from beginning to end, and I pride myself on keeping things very organized and neat and optimal from the very start of a project. And I think I accomplished that, and I'm really proud of what myself and the team ended up with.
I know this is a hard question to ask. Of all the effects that you were able to work on Anthem, which one would you go into the game and anybody who's playing be like, that's my effect, I did that?
I was always proud of the ice effects in the game. I don't know. I think even in Mass Effect, like something about working on the cryo and the ice effects was something that I always loved to do and loved to execute in the game during gameplay too.
How would that play out? Is that like a character ability, or is it like an environmental piece where like you're walking down the street and an avalanche comes down? Like,
it's more of a combat thing where you like throw an ice grenade at a guy and then like big explosion of cryogenic fluid or whatever it is, and then the guy freezes solid, and then you can like smash him into bits. Like that stuff always resonates with me from a gameplay level, and it's awesome to look at that and be like, yeah, I did that too. Like that's my effect.
That is awesome. I can just imagine like a big explosion, and now this like rock solid person who was at one time organic is now gonna like break like a pencil. That's so cool. And I can't imagine like how technical it was, man, just to, like from the shader side.
Yeah, that stuff is always, there's always so much involved with it, right? There's so much dynamism in the interplay between gameplay and the combination of effects that can happen. And there's so much work that went into it too, like from a design side of like, how do you get this guy to slow down and stop moving? Even in Mass Effect 3, we had this guys put together this amazing tech where the guy would stop mid animation and then become rigid and then fall over and just be like, boink, and like he'd be like stuck in whatever pose he was in. And at the time I was like, oh my God, you guys did it. This is the most amazing thing.
You talked about your workflow and your process on how you like to keep things organized and structured. I wanted to ask more about that. What was that kind of team structure that you worked in at BioWare during Anthem? And what was it like to work remotely from Canada?
Well, the team structure, I think, it's probably very similar to what other companies do. You know, you have your art director and then you have the leads of all the different departments. And then the VFX team was usually about 5 to 6 people, roughly. Working remotely from Edmonton I enjoy it. I enjoy living in Edmonton. You know, it gets really cold during the winter and stuff. There's a whole host of really fun winter activities that you can do in the snow and the ice, which I would dearly miss if I were to move to somewhere like LA or Austin.
I'm thinking of some of the, day-to-day activities of like how you would go about a day in the life of Trevor Gilday. So let's say you wake up from sunrise to sunset. What's a day look like for you?
You know, I get up, have my coffee, got to have my coffee. It's a luxury that I cannot live without. I'll walk my kids to school. I'm home, have some breakfast, sit down at my computer, tinker around with VFX for a while, maybe jump into Houdini and do some stuff. Who knows, So
is that for personal or is it kind of built into your work where you get some personal art, like R&D with your day?
It's personal R&D, but it's also incorporated into work.
That's awesome. I love that.
Being a parent, I don't have a lot of time for personal projects or anything like that. And then for the rest of the day, I'll go for a bike ride or something, or exercise. Things have really changed now that we're working from home and I don't have access to, gyms or anything like that. Trying to do my own working out at home, lots of yoga, bike rides when I can.
I hear Ring Fit is a really great exercise tool if you're into Nintendo Switch.
Yeah, I keep hearing about that and I keep telling myself like I should go pick that up. I heard that's a pretty good workout.
I want to ask you about your thoughts on the VFX industry and 2021. What are some trends that you're seeing out there in the market and how do you think that us as visual effects artists can really contribute toward those trends and really get involved?
I think definitely an increase in Houdini simulation techniques, like animated meshes being exported as Alembic data, real-time simulations for things like water and fog and clouds and stuff like that. Yeah, that kind of stuff.
I always thought about Houdini as being a tool more for realism. Is it something that you feel can also be applied in, quote, more stylized effects? Or does it have a very specific genre that Houdini fits into as a tool for VFX artists?
I see Houdini as one of the most versatile tools available right now. And I think that early on when I started investigating, it was really very daunting and very intimidating. But I think if you can apply it in so many different ways, I think it has application anywhere, really.
Can you give maybe one or two examples of where you've used Houdini in your own effects?
I've done some explosion simulations and smoke simulations. I actually did a course. We did a course that early on in Anthem, the whole effects team did an online training where we did some modeling techniques, which I found very interesting. Procedural modeling, procedural destruction.
You say that as an example, a building blowing up and falling apart with fractals. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And we did use some of that stuff in Anthem as well.
As visual effects artists, we're always trying to figure out what our identity is in the world, why companies need us and how we can contribute toward the bigger mission of making worlds believable. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on where VFX artists can make the biggest impacts in the companies and projects that they work on?
The biggest thing we can do is tell a story. We as effects artists at our core, we're storytellers, and every effect tells a different story, no matter how small or large. I think back to first effect I ever made. My lead showed me the basics, right? And then when he felt I was ready, he said, make a power-up effect. And that was the only direction he gave me. Just like, have at it. Make some kind of power-up. So of course, being a very green, very junior guy, what I end up with, well, it's just this huge ball of energy and it's just massive. And when you collect it, there's this huge explosion of particles, and hundreds of particles and all the bloom and everything I could try and do, I shoved it in there. And what do I end up with, right? It's this gaudy, ostentatious, horrid effect. It's just an eyesore. But at the time, I was like, yeah, this looks sick. Look at all that glowing crap, right? And what I realized over the course of my early career was that old Hackney saying really holds water. Less really is more. So just through experience and help from art directors and peers, I learned that every task needed to be thought about at a deep level. What does this need to tell? What are we trying to convey here? What in my effect is not serving the higher goal or desired outcome? And I think that's one of the hardest things to learn for an effects artist. Anybody can be taught how to use software effectively or to create amazing simulations or flipbooks. Anybody can use Photoshop to create high quality textures. But if you don't know how to align your work with the story and team and the art direction it's trying to convey, you're not going to hit a very high bar.
There's a forum post going on the real-time visual effects forums, and it's asking what our New Year's resolutions are. And I had to think about that earlier yesterday, and I thought, man, observing the natural order of the world and the energy that flows through everyday things like water splashes when you're washing your hand, and being able to articulate that in our effects is something that I really want to work on. I'm curious, do you have any resolutions going into the new year? Maybe this week, this month?
I have some personal ones, but related to art and work. I think a lot of my resolutions are more revolve around getting more involved. I'm aware of I'm in the Facebook group. I'm in the forums, not very often, and that's something I want to work on, is getting more involved. And everyone's doing these VFX Fridays or sketchbook things where they post in the forum. I've never really sort of joined in on that kind of stuff. So one of my resolutions is to get more involved.
Definitely want to see more of your work out there. And Twitter is always great. Just hashtag any of those VFX Fridays, VFX portfolios. You find all kinds of amazing talent worldwide, by the way, not just here in the US. You had mentioned that you have some lessons that you learned from your earlier effects where you just kind of globbed everything together. And I imagine there's been a lot of growth from that. Can you tell me about how you've been able to handle mistakes or failures in the past, and what's kind of like your coping strategy and your growth trajectory from those learning experiences?
I think mistakes happen to show us where we need to pay attention, right? Maybe you procrastinate on this one thing and left it too long, and now you've broken someone's trust. This is an area you need to work on, right? Why are you procrastinating on this? Don't dwell on it. Do something about it and become a better person from it. And that's kind of my viewpoint on mistakes.
Looking back to those earlier years, what did you wish you had known when starting out?
It's okay to ask for help. I think for me personally, I had a lot of I can do this on my own, that kind of mentality. And that's not a good mentality to be in. There's things out there for you. If you're willing to reach out, they're there, right? And it's okay to admit that you don't know how to do something. You're going to grow so much quicker if you just ask a question or say go on the forum and be like, oh, how do you approach this problem?
Speaking of asking questions, are there any role models that you've looked up to? Any mentors that have helped you along your journey? And they don't have to be VFX related.
I thought about this and I couldn't think of anyone specific, but I will say a bunch of games early on in my gaming life and career heavily inspired me. And the one thing that sprung to my mind was the Halo games, the Halo series, which I've been a huge fan of and still am.
Master Chief.
Yep. And I remember when Halo 3 came out, I had just started in the industry, and they implemented this feature where you could play through a campaign level and then watch a replay of the whole thing, beginning to end. All of your movements, everything you did was all recorded and you can watch it. And at the time, I just I thought that was groundbreaking, but it's not so groundbreaking anymore. But you could detach the camera from the player, pan it around from any angle, pause the replay, play it in slow motion. I spent hours in there just analyzing the effects, right? Looking at them from all angles, dissecting what I could see and study how they built it. I would push the camera right into the effect and just looking at it, I could determine oh, this is a mesh or this is a quad or whatever, and just dissecting it. And this gave me a lot of ideas for my own effects, and I learned and grew from these experiences a lot. Actually, any game that I play since I started out in this industry, I spent a great deal of time just looking at the effects and trying to pick out the tricks the team had implemented.
And that goes back to your comment about you're very detail oriented. You really do look at the smaller pictures when it comes to these things. And I read that a lot lately with Joseph Gilliard's book when he's out in nature looking at, fires and how that interaction happens with the flames and the air currents that come through and feed the fuel. So that's super cool to hear you say that. And I'd never thought about that with the replay systems. I always thought I got to get better at League of Legends, so I've got to watch my replays. And no, I could get better at visual effects by watching my replays. I want you to talk to me about your educational experience. I know you attended Alberta College, and you also worked on that independent study in AI around the study called ORTS you mentioned. Can you tell me a little bit about that? I know you talked about the StarCraft side from more involved within the school education portion for your, 4 years there in Canada? Is that how long y'all were in college?
It was a 1-year course, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What were the lowlights and the highlights of just being in school and learning? Do you feel like it's worth the money?
I do think it's worth it. At the time, looking back, I think I probably should have gone to a more sophisticated school dedicated to 3D, like Vancouver Film School or something. But at the time, I just didn't want to move out of Edmonton. But Alberta College was a good intro to graphics programs. Learning a little bit of 3D and learning Photoshop, I think, was a good way for me to start. One thing that was wild at the time at this course was they had these Silicon graphics machines, which is what they had Maya running on. And I wish I knew how they acquired them, because I think they're like tens of thousands of dollars. Like, they're just stupidly expensive, and they were buggy as all hell. I remember trying to work through these book tutorials on modeling things with NURBS and Maya and just running into so many brick walls. Eventually, I just kind of gave up on Maya and just focused on Lightwave.
That feels like Adobe Flash to me right now. It crashes like every hour for me.
Flash, yeah. I learned a lot of Flash animation too while I was there. This was the time when Flash was booming and all of these like websites were popping up with all of these like zany Flash animations. That was a fun time. That ORTS, it was an interesting project to work on. Having a lot of self-taught techniques for me in skinning and animating characters really helped me out. At the same time, I did a lot of like really hacky things to generate my art. Like, I would generate ambient occlusion textures out of Lightwave by animating these huge clusters of point lights around the object. I would animate it rotating 360 degrees in a single frame, and this would give you like these fuzzy ambient occlusion shadows. And I figured out how to like export that to the diffuse texture. And that project gave me a lot of creative freedom, because he didn't really care how the art looked. He just wanted these units made. And he was like, just take every StarCraft unit and make your own version of it, essentially. So I got to make all these models of these Zerg characters and the buildings and stuff. And it was actually kind of a lot of fun. There was a lot of like interesting ways that I figured out how to export specular hits into the diffuse, because, there was no shader. It wasn't this dynamic shader thing. It was just, you had your model and a diffuse texture. That's all you had to work with. So to make it look less flat, I developed all of these interesting hacks to get it to look a little bit better.
That's awesome, man. I actually looked over your branding message and some of your reel, and you say, I love blowing stuff up and making the player feel empowered through satisfying visual spectacle and subtlety. And just watching your reel is like pumping me up to do my own effects. Trevor, like, you are such a badass. No pun intended. So what really makes a good explosion in your opinion? And can you clarify to me, what exactly do you mean by being subtle with an explosion? Because to me, there's nothing subtle about an explosion.
Well, first off, thank you for your kind words. So to me, a good explosion needs proper timing. Without that, your explosion won't have the same impact. And what I mean by timing is appropriate speed at the start and follow through to appropriate slowness over time, dictated by the size and power that you want to convey. It's so important to have this like really punchy beginning, and everything expands very quickly, and then it slows down and comes to rest or whatever. All that stuff, it tells a story. Like I said, it all tells the viewer how powerful it is, how big it is, and all that stuff needs to be just so. And it all comes down to all these little tiny details, right? Every effect we build is a sum of its parts. And for me, my process when I'm building an effect, I'll start off with a rough draft or whatever, and then after it gets approved, you go back into it and you just tweak and tweak and tweak and tweak. All these little tweaks add up in the end, and that's what makes a good effect. Subtlety comes comes into play when you consider how the explosion or whatever impacts game playability. Late in the development of Anthem, we discovered that as a 4-player online team game, a lot can be happening on screen at any given moment. And we found almost all of our content was not forward-thinking enough to be acceptable in this regard. And the screen was turning into VFX soup constantly. So we had to take a huge amount of time and go back through almost every single combat effect and finesse it so the effects don't hinder the player experience. And I learned a lot from that experience, obviously.
You had mentioned that VFX soup was a big problem with Anthem because the entire screen would just light up with like all these emissive colors. In terms of optimization, when it comes to effects, how do you handle making your effects work with the environment?
In terms of optimization,
what are the considerations that a real-time visual effects artist needs to put in mind as opposed to having just pre-baked assets with no file size or limit?
I think it all comes down to making sure that it looks believable, right? If you're doing an effect for an environment, it has to serve the game. It can't be this thing that's trying to get your attention. That's where subtlety comes in, right? It has to be this thing that not only is a sum of its own parts, but it's a sum of the parts of the entire experience. And if it's detracting, then that's not a good place to be, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. I was thinking that oftentimes when it comes to creating our effects, you'd said it earlier, less is more sometimes. And we can get really gung-ho about adding in like all of these emitters and creating all of these different particles, and something that could be done with maybe like 20 particles may be more effective than 100 particles just because you're able to make it believable. And you do that through your timing and with the alignment, with whatever kind of like gameplay story you're trying to tell.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other side of that question I wanted to ask was in terms of effects pipeline. And I wonder, oftentimes, maybe in your own studio experience, do you as an effects team get involved in the creation of these scenarios or these gameplay elements early on? Or is it all kind of just shoved at the very end of the game development pipeline? It's like, all right, everything's done, the animation, the character models, the world, effects, make your stuff happen now.
Yeah, in my experience, it's always more of a collaborative effort between the whole team. And I think that's the way it needs to be. You know, if you're working on like a combat game, you know, VFX guys need to be in the room discussing what the combat team is trying to do, because the VFX are such a big part of that. And they're such a big part of the whole game in general. We need to be in those meetings, right? We need to be there to say like, hey, that idea can't be executed because of XYZ. Let's try to approach it from a different angle. For myself, I've always been an advocate of that. And I've always had a really great time working with designers in that way, sitting down and brainstorming, what do we want this ability to do? Ideas can start to form, right? VFX ideas can start to form. And if you express that to the team, that might give them other ideas, and everyone feeds off of that, right?
Yeah, that's really good. You'd made a move to Archetype, I always say that word wrong. Archetype Entertainment in November last year. I know there's an NDA on your current project, so you probably can't tell us what game you're working on. But before that, you did work at BioWare on titles like Mass Effect and Anthem for over 14 years. So I'm curious, what prompted you to move on to a new company?
It was kind of funny how everything worked out. It was a really tough decision for me. It's tough to articulate why I decided to leave. I liken it to a change of scenery was needed. One thing I always noted throughout my career was I always enjoyed moving my desk to a new location, especially if I'd been in the same spot for a while. I always found it boosted my overall mood and productivity. The decision to leave BioWare was, I think, largely rooted in this principle, but on a much more drastic scale, if that makes any sense. It was a weird feeling, started to notice this weird feeling at a core level, which took a while for me to even recognize. It sort of creeped up on me. At first I thought, am I losing my passion? Like, am I losing my edge here? What's happening? And then I started to recognize what it was. It was just a need for a drastic change. And, you know, it's funny because before 2020 happened and everyone started working from home, it never even crossed my mind that I was going to be looking for somewhere else to work, right? And then everyone started working from home. And then I was like, wow, you could just work from home. I'm sure you get the same thing where on LinkedIn, you know, as a VFX artist, you get people contacting you all the time around the world saying like, hey, you know, do you want this job? Do you want to interview for this job? And I always kind of just like push it to the side. I'm like, never even considered it, right? Mm-hmm. And then 2020 came along, and then I kind of like thought about it, and then it started to occur to me like, maybe I should peek through these doors that are opening to me, right? And then Archetype fell into my lap, and I decided to maybe consider it. And then certain things information was made known to me that obviously through NDA I can't talk about, but it was almost like all these checkboxes were ticking, right? And it was almost like the universe was saying like, hey, you should consider this. So I did, and then and that's where I am now.
That's really incredible. Thanks for sharing that, Trevor. I appreciate it. I was thinking about how oftentimes recruiters do come after you for potential job opportunities at other companies, but before it was like, oh, and the caveat is you have to leave your place to come move over here. And I'm hoping, and I see this as a trend going into 2021, that remote work will become more commonplace because companies realize that their employees can still be productive even without being in the office. And I'm sure you have lots of team meeting Zoom calls or whatever program y'all are using. So you still get some FaceTime at least.
Yeah, they agreed to let me work here remote even after all of this has gone back to normal, which is great. They do want to like fly me up to Austin at some point just to be, some face-to-face time, not through Zoom, you know what I mean? So that will happen
so
in the future.
You can get a beer, man. Or I don't know if you drink, but maybe coffee. You like coffee. So we can get coffee.
I do. Yeah, I like both. I love both.
Trevor, are you ready to go into the lightning round questions? Quick and easy, just like visual effects.
Let's do it.
What is a perfect one-day getaway in Alberta and the surrounding area?
I would say a trip to the mountains, either Banff or Jasper, which are the mountain towns here in Alberta. It's amazing scenery. It's a great place to reconnect with nature and recharge.
Have you ever been skiing or snowboarding?
Yes, I do. I do that. I love snowboarding so much. It's like one of my favorite things to do in the wintertime.
What video game or app are you using on your phone that is the most fun?
I don't play a lot of games on my phone. I don't really have the time. If I'm playing a game, it's usually on Switch. I know I'm going to receive a lot of flack for this, but I'm going to say Twitter. And yeah, I get the criticism. Okay, Twitter can be like this hellscape of bad people posting like negative stuff, especially with this insane world events happening right now, right? You take the good with the bad, and it's just like our real world, right? There's a huge amount of amazing people to follow on Twitter, like from concept artists to effects people, musicians, streamers, you name it, it's there. And if you follow the right people, it can bring you a lot of joy. And it definitely brings me a lot of joy. One example I can think of is there's this one VR artist that I follow. Her name is Rosie Summers. And she does these amazing things in tilt brush. And like she has a green screen behind her and she's filming herself with the VR helmet on. And she's manipulating her VR worlds around her and it's composited. So she's like standing in it while manipulating it and like at the same time drawing it. Over the holidays, she posted this VR advent calendar thing where every day she would go in and she'd like open up this little door and pull out this object. And it was like this, she built over the course of the month, she built this huge snow globe and she kept adding elements to it, the houses and the train. And it was just this amazing VR advent calendar. And that was just like one of the highlights of my holidays, just seeing that every day.
That is so cool. What is your favorite thing to cook or eat?
Anything related to breakfast. So, pancakes, bacon, perfectly scrambled eggs. My kids call me the pancake master because I make them so fluffy and delicious.
Does chicken and waffles count?
For sure. Yes, absolutely.
What is your favorite book or podcast you've listened to recently?
I recently listened to a science fiction book called Legacy of Heorot by Larry Niven from 1987, I think. It tells the story of a human colony on a distant planet, and they discover this creature called a Grendel, which uses like bead glands in its body to move at superhuman speeds. But if it uses it too often, it can die from overheating. There's a really great twist in the story that I just did not see coming. I'm just a sucker for any good science fiction. And it's also narrated by John Lee, who is phenomenal. He narrates a lot of other great science fiction.
I feel like they must have made a movie on that at one point. Grendel sounds familiar.
Grendel is actually a reference to Beowulf. Is it?
Yeah.
I think it's a reference to Beowulf.
Favorite video game artist or visual effect you're jealous of that is not your own?
I would say anything hand-drawn, cartoony effects, 2D animated stuff. I love seeing hand-drawn stuff, like the stuff that Jason Kaiser does. It's something I admire because it's something that I've never done done myself. And one day I'm going to sign up for his 2D course, I'm sure.
Best advice for a first-time visual effects artist or people looking to get into the industry?
Get feedback on your work and don't take critiques personally. Use what you have at your disposal. Get involved, get in a Facebook group, get on the forums, reach out for that help, right?
What are you most excited about for the future of visual effects?
I'm excited for more real-time simulations like Fluid and smoke and stuff like that. I've seen a lot of really cool stuff from the Fluid Ninja guy on Twitter, Andres Ketzer, I think his name is. He's got this plugin for Unreal that does this like real-time fluid simulation. It's amazing.
Trevor, what question do you never get asked that you wish you were asked more often?
I think I will say, can you show me how you did that? Is a question that I would like to get asked. Just before I left BioWare, I was asked to give a presentation showing real-time effects workflow. And I was really hesitant at first, as public speaking is never been my strong suit. But after I agreed to it, I did it, and it felt really good to do. And a lot of folks love to see it. And so I think I would do that again if asked.
I'm going to ask when GDC comes up again, I want to see you on stage presenting.
Oh, well, I don't know. Maybe. We'll see. I don't know.
Are there any final thoughts or things you want to plug? Anything you want to promote? A project that you're working on? Any other artists that you want to give a shout out to?
I'll just plug Archetype. I'll just say everyone who loves science fiction, you're going to be in for a real treat. The team is incredible. It's very exciting to be a part of it. And I think when we show people what we're working on, I think they're going to be really blown away.
Trevor, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate, and this conversation was an absolute blast.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to today's episode with Trevor Gilday. Here are the takeaways. Number 1, find your G.I. Joe exercise. Timing is the hardest part of FX, and if you can master that, you can master anything. Number 2, VFX art, we are storytellers at our core. Through experience and mentorship, every task needs to be thought out at a deep level. What is in your effect? Is it serving the higher goal or the desired outcome that you wish for? Or is it just a compilation of random things? Number 3, explosions need proper timing. Appropriate speed at the start and follow through to appropriate slowness over time, dictated by the size and power that you want to convey. All right, everybody. Awesome time today. Really, really excited to see so many job opportunities out there and so much talent in the pool. Feel free to connect with me or Trevor, and we'll see you next time. Rock on.